the invitation, and please take the floor.
Yes, this works. Kalimera, everybody. I'm going to speak in English. You are aware of that. So those of you who need the headphones, I know very little Greek. What I remember is from when I was young, at church you would say, Aios oteos, Aios iskiros, Aios athanatos, eleis anima, and we would do this. I don't know what this means, but it sounds beautiful. It sounds absolutely wonderful. I'd like to thank you for inviting me, for having me with you here. It's always gives me anxieties about talking when I'm abroad, because who am I to speak to your context? I bring with me a lot of experience internationally, but you are the experts of your own context. So what I share with you is something that I've learned. I know I don't look very old, but I'm actually 62 next Wednesday, so I'm going to be 62 years old. A lot of experience. I started teaching in schools and in communities at the age of 15, so that's a long, long time. So I'm going to share with you what I learned through life, but also what I learned thanks to a lot of good luck, a lot of fortunate incidents where I became involved, including with Dimitris actually, but with some others like Nikos Rosos here and others in international projects. And I'm going to talk to you a little about career guidance, about the quality of career guidance, especially for the groups that this meeting is about. And I want to congratulate you for actually deciding to have a conference, a two-day conference workshop on people who are considered to be vulnerable. Please notice that I've changed a little bit the title. As I work through the slides, I keep working through them. I woke up at 5 this morning to, I keep fooling around with the slides, even with and I'll tell you why soon. I changed the title a little bit. I don't like to talk about the vulnerable. I like to talk about those who have been made vulnerable. There's a very big difference between that. Of course, we are all vulnerable. Look, I do this. I don't see anything except red colors and dots. I put this on and I see you. I am very vulnerable. Without this, I often wonder, if I travel and I lose this, how am I going to manage? So vulnerability is not a state which is innate, but it is a state which is induced by the surroundings, by the context in which we function. So it's extremely important to be very careful with the words that we use. So I'm going to talk to you about that. But before I actually start talking about this and sharing some ideas, let me tell you a little bit who I am and where I come from. Of course, I am a professor. Of course, I'm at a university. Of course, I have lots of international experience. But I also am a person like you, with my strengths and my weaknesses. And I come from a very little tiny island called Malta, which has been in the news recently, not for very good reasons. We've lost our prime minister, who had to resign. Today they're electing a new one. I come from this little island, which is not that far from Italy, about 100 miles from Sicily and Italy, and a bit farther away from Greece. We have a word for the wind that comes from Greece. We call it gregalata. When the wind comes from gregale, from Greece, it's a cold wind, a bitter wind, with lots of waves. So we are always afraid when we talk, say, gregalata. Today we have wind coming from Greece. And like you, we are a Mediterranean country. Look where I come from. It could be anywhere in Greece, probably this, no? The same type of people, the same type of limestone. I have a family, 2 young men. One of them has made me grandfather of 2, another 2 boys. And this changes a lot our perspective on life. So this is who I am. This is my country. I work in it. I work with NGOs. I work with universities. I do my best as an academic. And I will share with you some key points. And I say this because sometimes when we listen to somebody whose work you might have read. You might have read some of the books I've written or some of the articles. God knows what you imagine I am. I am exactly like you, trying very hard to make sense of the complex world that Dimitris talked about in the previous talk, which is so complex. It is so complex that even the most brilliant minds on earth, people like, I don't know, Habermas in Germany, Chomsky in the States, keep emphasizing that it's impossible for one person to connect all the bits and pieces, although we are increasingly understanding how this world works. We refer to this period we're going through as the interregnum. This is a word that Zygmunt Bauman uses, a well-known philosopher who died recently, originally from Poland, but also an Italian philosopher called Gramsci. He talks about the interregnum, which is a period between two states, two periods in history. We are leaving one period and entering into another. Some call it the Anthropocene, particularly given the challenges, the environmental challenges that Dimitri spoke about earlier. We are passing through this phase where the institutions that we created for the state as it was are no longer functioning properly. They cannot function. They are falling apart. Like the welfare state, for example. The whole notion of the state, who governs, who has power, that is slowly dissolving. And yet we haven't yet formed a new world order. And therefore we are going through a period which might last hundreds of years. It's what we call in history la longue durée, the long period, the long phase, until things start, a new social order emerges unless we mess up the world to such an extent that there is no longer a world. So we are facing complexity, and one big challenge for us is not to retire in a corner because scared by this complexity, which is a temptation I feel, even though I'm an academic, reading all the time about what's happening around me. And yet there is this temptation of saying it's too complex, cannot make sense of it, I retire and take care of my family because that's the only thing I have some control over. So the idea of my presentation today is quite challenging, actually, that if we're going to really engage with the world as it is, in order to imagine a world as it could and should be, here is the notion of social justice. This is very challenging, painful. It requires quite a lot of thinking and quite a lot of courage. So what I'll be doing, and these are the key points of my presentation, and I was told I have an hour, but I'm aware that time is somewhat stretched because of the way things went. So Dimitris, don't hesitate to, you or Kiki or Nikos, when you see people around you falling asleep, just do like that, and I'll start winding down, okay? So what I'll try to do is give you some background about career guidance. I want to emphasize that the area that we are working in is important, has value. It will not solve all the problems of the world, but it has a role to play. So I'd be very happy to talk about some of the things that are happening in career guidance and some of the principles that we have articulated to see whether these connect, resonate with who you are and where you're at. Then I'll try to focus a little bit on specific groups that have been mentioned, and I will be sharing some reflections with you. So I have more slides probably than I will manage to go through, but that's okay. I'm not stressed if you're not stressed, okay? That is, there's enough material that you can go through when you receive the slides. And at the end of the slide presentation, there's my email. Please feel free to contact me. I have so many resources that I'd like to share with you if you want them, okay? They are all free. There's also websites that you can go to, which I refer to. So you have quite a lot of resources plus the slides. So we'll go through this and we'll see where it takes us. will think through some of these issues. I will try to emphasize that what we need are some tools to think through these things. I'm not going to give you recipes or easy answers. That would be doing the people we wish to serve a disservice. There's no recipes. There are some principles, but it's all very context specific. And I will try to see what it means to adopt a social justice lens, a social justice perspective. So that's the menu I have prepared for you. Hope that it kind of responds to some of your needs. And as I said, let's do our best. And so, starting with the first point, something I want to emphasize is how important it is what you are doing. That is, those of us who are involved in helping people across the lifespan. Dimitris earlier referred to the importance of thinking not only of lifelong guidance, but life-wide. People do not come with their problems in very clear, defined boxes. This is my career. I have a problem with my wife. I have a problem with my children. Life is too messy. We only use these labels, and they are terribly helpful, but also terribly dangerous. We use these labels to help us think because we are so limited. But people's lives are a mess, like mine, and probably like yours. Lives are messy. Problems merge with each other. You're not happy at work, it affects my relationship with my wife. It affects my relationship with my children. It affects my relationship to money. It affects so many things. So, and yet we are working with people. And what is of the good news is that since the year 2000 at least, our field of career guidance, which includes also counseling in a broader sense, has been the focus of attention of many organizations. Starting with the OECD, the World Bank, the European Commission, ILO, UNESCO. So many organizations have been involved in trying to see what other countries are doing, other countries including your own, Greece. 55 countries at least were reviewed, and I was very fortunate to be involved in many of these reviews. And what we know is that as people try to make sense of the complexities around them, of the crises in economics, in the environment, in demographics, in the welfare state, in the mobility of people and the movement of people between the global south and the global north, where Greece obviously is at the front line there, as is in some cases Malta. So we see that as people try to handle these issues, there are many top-down and bottom-up initiatives. There's a lot of learning that we can do from this international experience. There's been a lot of analysis of policies, of research, the kind of training that is provided. Networks have been formed. There are some of them. Dimitris and I think even Nikos were involved in the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network, and several others. I won't go into them. Nikos here organized a training program called ECADOC in Athens for those who are doing a PhD in career guidance. I did the same thing as he did, probably less successfully, in Malta, and so on and so forth. The PES network. I even, thanks to work I've done with Tony Watts, who I will be mentioning later on, we also looked at the career guidance services offered not only in schools, but also in public and private employment services. And we were involved in trying to guide the PES networks in that. There's also been quite a lot of work done, not just in the wealthier countries, what we call the global north, but also the global south. And this is particularly important because middle-income countries like yours and mine, we have dynamics in our countries, especially in the Mediterranean. Last couple of years ago, I published a book on career guidance in the Mediterranean region with an input by one of the patriarchs of Greek career guidance, Kassotakis, who many of you know. Okay, I'm so sad he couldn't be with us due to illness. So our countries are different from the States. Sometimes I read theories from the States and I say, these are from another planet. They never talk about realities that are true for us in the Mediterranean. For example, the importance of the underground economy, where a lot of the work that is done is not even declared. And yet many families thrive on that. And I'm very careful before I say that this is illegal. Who says it's illegal? And why do they say it's illegal? Some very interesting studies, for example, about the economy and how it works in Naples, and the morality of men who have no other solution to bring food on the table other than being working in the underground economy, because the formal economy is ignoring them. So we have to be very careful, like anthropologists, trying to understand what's going on. Very few theories from the States explain how, for many of us, who we know is more important sometimes than what we know. Good, bad? Is it meritocracy? Is it more the political party that you are loyal to that makes a difference in your lives? We need to study these things and be more specific about what career guidance means in our context. Because a lot of the theories that come from the global north have some value, and we can take something from them, but we need to develop our own understanding of what's happening in our own countries, given our background. For example, that the countries in the south of Europe, like yours and mine, still have very strong faith-based communities where the welfare state fails, charity, faith-based, faith-motivated community dimension becomes very important. The family and extended family are extremely important. When my auntie, my mother's sister, lost her husband due to cancer when he was 40 and she had 4 kids, the state gave her something, but it was all the family, the extended family, that chipped in and supported her to raise 4 kids. Now, you don't hear about these theories from Scandinavia, where they have a very strong welfare state system. Okay? So, we need to look. There's been a lot of policy innovation, lots of laws, acts, education acts, career guidance act, employment acts that have been written and promulgated. And there is an effort to move from the global to the local, as I'm saying, making our understanding of career guidance look both worldwide, because problems that are being created now are so global that they cannot be solved at the nation-state level. Don't forget, the nation-state was invented only 200 years ago. And some people are saying that the time of the nation-state is over. It is a form of governance that is no longer really relevant to solve the environmental challenges we have. Goes beyond the nation-state. The nation-state cannot solve that problem. The nation-state cannot solve the problem of refugees, which are going to increase by 1,000-fold once the sea levels start rising. In Bangladesh, more than 2 million people on the coast will have to move. So we are facing quite big challenges. Of course, guidance is not going to solve these challenges. But as I said, we might have a role to play. So, learning from this international experience. Why am I saying this? It is because so much material has been developed that if we're working seriously in this area and not as amateurs, fiddling here, having an idea, trying to develop a practice because you had an idea at night, those are important. But let's learn from what there has been developed over the years by so many people working in this area. And what I've tried to do, which is where our conversation with Dimitris had started, is I've tried to take these hundreds and thousands of pages of reports that I've worked on with others and said, if I had to synthesize them and produce a thin handbook with the top ideas in career guidance, in order to improve the quality of our services, what can I do? And I developed this handbook, which is there, free of charge. It's just been translated into Slovenian, Italian. It's going to be translated into German, Korean. You're welcome to have it. Most of you speak English. You can read it in English. But if you want to translate it, there is no copyright. We can even give you the template. Use the same photos if you wish. Up to you. But in this handbook, you have the different aspects of career guidance, largely aimed at the education sector, but a lot of the principles are applicable to young people and adults. And there you can actually learn about what we know from these many studies and how we can improve. So that's another resource. I will not...
What's the title, Ronald? What's the title of the book?
The book?
Yeah.
I forgot the title. Okay, it is Enhancing the Quality of Career Guidance in Secondary Schools. At the end of the slides, you have a link to it, and you click it, and up it comes. Okay, so there it is for you. It's a useful resource. Now, something else I've done, trying to kind of bring things together, because there's so much out there, is what are some of the principles that emerge from all these studies about career guidance. And this is just, it's impossible for you to make sense of it, but I'll just highlight some of the principles that are so valuable for those of you who are working with ex-offenders, refugees, persons with disability, with women who are suffering from domestic violence, we have not mentioned in the titles so far, with people who have mental health problems, with people who are of different sexual orientation. All these groups that we are calling either vulnerable, some call them at risk, some, like me, call them those who have been made vulnerable. Okay? There are certain principles that actually Dimitris has already mentioned in his short speech. I go back to it. First of all, legal entitlement to support. So one of the major arguments that I have made over time is, don't forget that about 300 years ago, 250 years ago, philosophers like Hobbes, Rousseau, made the claim that we give up some of our liberties to the state. And in return, the state gives us protection. So there is a theory of the state. We're going to see how, because of a new approach to economics, which Greece has suffered terribly from, one of the countries in the world where you have suffered most from it, what we call neoliberalism. Okay? Because we have adopted a new system of the economy, the new economy, which is now hopefully on the way out, largely because of environmental reasons, but also because of the gap it has created between the haves and have-nots. This state has given up on what is called, what Rousseau calls the social contract, a social contract. I give you some of my liberties, as this, the citizen gives some of the liberties to the state, and the state has to give something back, which is freedom of religion, freedom of expression, the welfare state, handling insecurity, trying to cushion insecurity. That's why we give so much of our freedoms to the state. Now the state is taking more and more from the citizen in terms of taxation, in terms of expectations, in terms of asking you to tighten your belts. Greece knows what that means. But giving us less and less, because more and more go to the elite, the 1%. So we have a situation here where we cannot but be political. If we're going to work in career guidance from a social justice perspective, then we have to be political in challenging the state and saying, oi, what's happened to the social contract? What are you giving us? So there is a legal entitlement to services, with the citizen having the right to redress. That is, if you do not give me this, then I protest. And we have seen that citizens are rising up in France, in Greece, in Spain, in Italy, in so many countries. Why? Because the conditions, the material conditions of our existence are at stake. Other principles, so this represents the principles that we explored in the thanks to the European Lifelong Guidance Policy Network. The principles that should guide the design of our services in career guidance. There's hundreds of documents behind this, but I've synthesized this in this way. Here are some other principles. It meets diverse needs. If we have a career guidance, if we have service that is really fit for purpose, it has to recognize that one size does not fit all, and that people have different needs. It also emphasizes, as Dimitris did, that we have to take the stakeholders into account. I don't particularly like this word stakeholders, but let's use it. Where those who we say we are working for actually have a say in the design of the system that is to be their service. I saw this in Luxembourg, where women who were the subject of domestic violence actually organized a service of career guidance for women like them. Who more than them know the situation that they're trying to address? Me? A male? A white male? A privileged male? No. I might have something to offer on their terms, and I might be used as a consulting expert or what have you, but the real experts are them. So the design of the system has to be, and there are very few countries, if any at all, where the stakeholders are actually designing and actually developing and delivering the system. That is why it's so important, the panel that we're going to have afterwards. Much more than what I'm going to say, is what they have to say. Because as we're going to see, and this is the biggest lesson that we get from a philosopher from France called Michel Foucault, who you might have studied in at your universities, but perhaps he's a bit difficult and the words. But basically what he's saying is, even when we think we're doing good, we're doing harm. And he tells us why we are doing harm. And one way of avoiding that is to make sure that the voice of the people that we say, we claim we are serving, actually has great importance. Client interests first is another principle. It enables and empowers, it promotes equity. These are all principles that those of us working with so-called vulnerable need to really respect. And that we offer linked services, because problems are linked. They do not come, just when my secretary retired, I have a new secretary, and one of the things she told me recently, and by recently I would say last Thursday, that she was telling me what happened to her when she had her second baby, who was born 4 days before my second grandson. So there is a lot of we talk about babies. And she said, I didn't tell you, but he was born with Downs. You know Downs, I don't know how you call it here, but you understand me, with Down syndrome. And when they gave me the baby in my arms, the first thing that came to my mind, she told me, was this: what will happen to him when I die? That was her first reaction. And then we talked how difficult it was. She cried, I cried with her, because these are very difficult things. And what she told me was very interesting. She said, what made me survive was the amount of services that came around me to help me go beyond this. It was beautiful what she said. That she was looking forward, she said something which blew my mind. Just to see that although I'm talking about vulnerable groups, we have our own prejudices. She said, I will exchange him with nothing, with nobody, my son. But what helped her was all the services that came together in a unified way to help her not focus on what he couldn't do, but what he can do in the future, which I think is beautiful. That is what we call enabling and empowering. Some reflections. Are we still awake? Okay? You're still with me? All right. Reflection on this one. Listen to Jacques Lacan, who is a psychotherapist, philosopher, very interesting guy. Jacques Lacan said this: we live in a world of words that creates a world of things. Let me repeat that. A world of words that creates a world of things. How we speak about something creates that something. There's a very big difference about talking about the disabled and persons with disability. I'm feeling this now because suddenly I'm being told I'm senior citizen, which is great because when I use my card, I go to museums free, I pay half price at cinemas, I pay half price in many things, so great. But I find myself, very interestingly, living the label that has been given to me. Suddenly, I feel old. Suddenly, I start doubting myself. Suddenly, I'm thinking a lot about a box made of wood and a cross on it. Why? Because labels come with a whole script with them. And once you use the label on me, even if it is to help me, you are putting me in a box. The brown box with the cross on it. Thank you very much. Labels help us. We are human beings. We are limited. We need labels. Otherwise, we can't go through, I have to know that this is my wife. Last time I was swimming in the sea without my glasses. I spent 10 minutes talking to a woman who turned out not to be my wife because I couldn't see properly. My wife was not amused. We need labels. My wife, my son, my house, my this, my that. We need labels, but labels are dangerous. Look at some of the labels that we use in guidance and how dangerous they can be. The disabled, the vulnerable. You tell me I'm vulnerable, suddenly I fall into a world where I need help all the time, where I'm weak, at risk. Not made at risk, I'm at risk. Employability, even this word is horrible. It's used a lot by the European Commission. You have to increase your employability. We're not saying that there is unemployment thanks to the messed up economics we have adopted, and therefore you end up unemployed. No, you are unemployed because you are not employable, because you have a tattoo, because you don't know how to write a CV, because you don't know how to do your hair, because you don't know how to sit for an interview. No. These are hugely dangerous words, which we have to be very careful how to use. In fact, in Latin America, I'm looking very carefully at Latin America. In Brazil, they have developed a system of career guidance, which is beautiful, fantastic. They take from the States, the life design movement, but what they actually do is they use Paulo Freire's methods in order to challenge the kind of mindsets that people who have been made vulnerable come to. So they say, why are you using this word? What does this word mean? What is it doing to you? Who has an interest that you use that word and not another? Where is the power going on here? Who is winning and who is losing by using that word? Why do you feel that problems which have a structural source, the economy, bad politics, corruption, you are feeling and living as an individual? And you implode in yourself, thinking that you're the one who is causing this misery. It's personal misery caused by a systemic cause. And that is where we have to be extremely careful when we use these words, like activation, as if the unemployed need to be activated, as if they are robots that are kind of, stopped, and you have to find the key to start them off. Come on. So be extremely careful in our field when we're working with so-called vulnerable groups that we do not fall into this huge temptation of using the words used by the powerful that render the vulnerable even more vulnerable and render the vulnerable responsible for problems caused elsewhere. What we call in our jargon the problem of responsibilization. That if there's something wrong in your life, it is your fault and your fault alone. And career guidance can very easily fall into this trap. As we try to do good, we are doing a lot of harm. This is the range of groups with specific needs, and there's many more. Remember that these do not fall into boxes. If I am an ex-offender, possibly my family life had disintegrated. I am shunned by the community. I probably fall into the working, non-working, lower socioeconomic groups, lower class. Let's call them the working class, or the precariat, as they are called nowadays. It is not unlikely that I might substance abuse, because how can I handle life? So we have to work with theories of intersectionality, that people do not fall neatly into labels. Life can be extremely challenging and complex, and we have to be aware of that. And while there are lots of questions that we need to ask, and I cannot answer them as to what to do, how to do it, all these, develop indicators, and so on and so forth, we also have to remember what Dimitris' last slide told us when he showed us that photo of, what's his name? Ray Charles, that fantastic musician. That behind these labels there is an individual. And nothing kind of has such an impact on me as this phrase from another philosopher from Lithuania, a Jewish philosopher called Levinas. I don't know how many of you have studied his work, Emanuel Levinas, who says, listen to this, how powerful. When I am in front of you, I tremble in awe in front of your otherness. I tremble in awe in front of your otherness. That is, I cannot know you. All this blah blah about empathy. I cannot really know you. What I can do is understand how different you are. And that you are unknowable to me. And he uses the very interesting comparison. He's very religious in his approach. He's Jewish. He uses the Talmud a lot about Moses in front of the burning bush. You're in front of something, you know it's great. You have no way of knowing who and what it is, but you tremble in awe. If we lose that trembling in awe in front of the other, we should not be working in this field, in my view. And to make this more concrete, I would recommend something extraordinary as a documentary, which many people seem not to know about. It's, I think, the best documentary there is to see in our field. Have you ever heard of 7-Up? Not the drink, not Sprite, this is 7-Up. 7-Up is a documentary which started in 1964 with people who were 7 years old. And every 7 years, they are filmed talking about their dreams, their careers, their love life, what they'd like to do, their passions. 7-Up, 14, 20, it goes on and on until recently in 2017, they actually interviewed these 14 kids. Again, now they are old people, 63 up. And here they are with their lives. And the DVDs are available, you can buy them, you can find a lot of them for free on YouTube, and they are amazing. And they remind us about the life journey of so many different people. Life journeys of people who live in the UK in this case, but this has been repeated in Russia, in South Africa, I think in France. Many countries try to do this. And it's won lots of awards. And I want to show you, if I may, just a snippet to get a taste. And I'll tell you why I show it to you. Let's see if it works.
In 1964, Granada Television brought together a group of 7-year-olds. We have followed their lives every 7 years, their dreams, ambitions, and fears for the future.
7 years older, 7 years fatter, a bit less hair.
You look at me at 7 and you look at me even now at 63. It's flown by, Michael.
It's a lifelong achievement to be part of this programme. Once you get to your 60s, it all gets a bit, how long have we got now?
I certainly don't look forward to it every 7 years. I suppose as you get a bit older, you've got less to lose.
All these things that I've said over the years, yes, it has been worth it. And you better cut it, because otherwise I'm going to cry.
The moment of pure joy in my life was when my son was handed to me when he was born.
There's just no place for regrets in this world. Maybe one regret is probably would have liked more children.
There's various things that I can do, they can't do. They can't change a light bulb, but I can't get on Netflix.
When we started at 7, most women were in the kitchen.
Did you meet enough men before you decided who to marry?
I thought that was actually an insulting question. You didn't have any idea of the changing role of women. And I want you to go,
Children inherit something from their parents.
Nobody wants to confess that they suffer mental ill health.
I'm sitting here talking to you now. I'm squirming. I want my life to have meant something.
The sooner you understand who you are, the sooner you understand what you can do. It's taken me virtually 60 years to understand who I am.
I'm still the same little kid, really. Probably all of us are.
cheers!
But still plenty to do. It's not all over yet.
So you might feel tempted to have a look at this, and I've shown it to you because I wanted to kind of convey to you how noble our profession is, to be part of the lives of others in their life journey. That it can go one way, the other, you know. The best definition of career guidance that I have found is by a guy you might have heard of, because he comes from your country, Socrates, who said that if you are an educator, you are the midwife of the soul. And that's what we are, midwives. Of people who are differently located in the social structure, very differently located, who have unequal access and relationships to what we can call the goodies of life, power, money, health, education, and so on and so, status, security. And as we try to be of value to them, as we try to add value to their lives, we have to be very careful to keep a good balance between thinking that they are vulnerable because of pathologies of them as individuals. And therefore we use words like, their personality, have problems with their personality, their self-image, they don't have enough self-efficacy, they are unclear about their interests, they don't know how to make decisions, they are not ready for work, blah, blah, and all that. And then the other side of the coin, which is that they are vulnerable because pathologies exist not in them as much as in the society that is a home to them. And that is where we then start challenging and doing political work. I'm aware that time is really passing. And how much should I give myself? 5 minutes?
You get
5. Okay. So basically, career guidance is an intervention in the normal flow of life. Keep in mind what we've said, being trembling in awe in front of the other, at the same time, wanting to be of value to them. And how are we going to do it? We are midwives. How can we exercise our profession? As people who, due to the circumstances of their life, do not anticipate that they're going to have a good life. They don't even have the capacity to aspire because life has given them so many hard knocks. Their horizons for action are limited. So we have a role to play in being enabling. And perhaps I will conclude with these last 2 slides. There's so many more, but that doesn't matter. If I learned something in 62 years, look, it's that people are different, but wherever I've been, and I've been in most places, I spent 3 years in New Zealand, for example, doing my PhD. I've been a lot to Arab states. I've been a lot in Africa, in South America, many countries. There's a lot of diversity, but there is one thing which also unites us. There's many things which unite us, the use of language, for example. But one thing which is we are all looking for happiness. We're all looking to be happy. And some people do. I once was, in a way, shipwrecked for a week and a half with my wife on an island of Fiji, where people were living a very primitive life. And I tried to understand. We were terrified, but we got out of there. One day you will hear the story, but we got out of this island. But what we saw was, again, a search for happiness. I have concluded in my 62 years of life that there are 3 things that make us happy, really happy. I'm not sure that they are universal, but I know that they apply to a lot of people. One is that we have to have a sense of purpose. The second is that we have to have a passion for something. And the third is that we have to have connection. Sorry about the slides, things moved while we were transferring them to this laptop. But these 3 things, these 3 elements are very important. And what contributes to giving us a sense of purpose, a sense of passion and connection? Actually, work. So when we are trying to help the vulnerable, groups rendered vulnerable, in order to get into work, even sometimes work which is not the best kind of work that they could do, we are helping them achieve 3 things that can contribute to their happiness. Because work actually gives access to livelihood, work gives us a sense of purpose, helps us express ourselves, be creative, gives us conviviality, sometimes gives us the opposite, but work has the potential of doing that. Gives us social recognition, being part of something bigger. So, my friends, time is up. I'll just quickly go through the slides to make you a bit curious so that you look at the slides later. You see, I had a few. This is beautiful. Those of you who want, you're not alone in trying to come up with an inclusive, emancipatory career guidance. These are the beautiful words in a manifesto for career guidance for social inclusion that the University of Padova group have developed. It's a beautiful manifesto which I strongly recommend you read and sign up to. And there is the link at the end. Look at those beautiful words. It's all about economics, profitability, etc., etc. It is about how we can become more fully human. Okay, these are some ideas about emancipatory guidance, which you can find. And this is the last slide where, as I told you, you have these links, which I hope will be helpful. Thank you very much.
Νομίζω ότι τώρα καταλαβαίνετε γιατί καλέσαμε τον κύριο Σουλτάνα.